The transport shuttle touched down on Platform 7 with a hiss of hydraulics that made my teeth ache. I stood at attention in full ceremonial armor, the weight of tradition pressing harder than the metal plates across my shoulders. Behind me, the honor guard waited in perfect formation, their faces hidden behind visors that reflected the cold starlight filtering through the dome above us. The war was over. We had won, and now came the price of peace. The shuttle's loading ramp descended with mechanical precision, revealing nothing but shadow and the faint glow of restraint fields. I had seen the holovids, read the briefings, memorized every protocol about handling Valtheron royalty. What I hadn't prepared for was the silence. No fanfare, no diplomatic procession, just the soft hum of energy fields and the click of boots on metal as two guards emerged first. They wore armor I didn't recognize, organic and flowing like liquid obsidian. Between them walked a figure wrapped in ceremonial chains that glowed with their own internal light. Each link pulsed with a rhythm that matched a heartbeat. The chains weren't just restraints. They were a statement, a symbol of surrender written in a metal that cost more than most colonies. She stopped at the edge of the ramp, and for the first time, I saw her face. The briefings hadn't mentioned that Valtheran queens could be young. They hadn't mentioned the way their skin shifted colors with their emotions, currently a deep blue that I instinctively understood meant shame. Her eyes met mine, large and luminous, with pupils that contracted to thin vertical slits in the station's harsh lighting. "Captain Marcus Reeves of the Terran Defense Fleet," my commanding officer announced from somewhere behind me. "Step forward to receive your war bride as stipulated in the Treaty of Collapsed Stars." The term tasted like ash. I had fought for 3 years against her people, watched friends die in the void between worlds, and now I was supposed to what? Play house with enemy royalty while politicians congratulated themselves on peace? I moved forward anyway because orders were orders, even the ones that made your stomach turn. The Valtheran guards stepped aside without a word, their movements synchronized in a way that suggested neural linking. She stood alone now, chains pooling at her feet like liquid silver, and I realized with sudden clarity that she was terrified. "The chains remain until the bonding ceremony is complete," one of her guards said, his voice carrying harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't produce. "It is tradition. It is law. It is the only way she could be transferred to your custody." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Up close, I could see the tremor in her shoulders, the way her hands clenched and unclenched within their restraints. The chains connected at her wrists, her throat, her ankles, all leading to a central lock that pulsed with the same blue light as her skin. "I am Queen Sariath of the Seventh Clutch," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying perfect English learned from who knows how many hours of forced study. "I am yours by treaty and by defeat. I will honor the terms. I will not resist." "I will—" Her voice cracked, the blue of her skin deepening to something almost purple. "That's enough," I said quietly. The words came out rougher than I intended. "You don't need to recite the whole surrender speech." Her eyes widened, pupils dilating with what might have been surprise. Behind me, I heard the commanding officer shift his weight, a subtle reminder that protocols existed for a reason. But I was the one who had to live with this decision, who had to look at this woman every day and pretend that chains and treaties made anything right. "The ceremony," the Valtheran guard prompted. "It must be completed before we depart." I had memorized the words 3 days ago, phonetic Valtheron that tasted like copper on my tongue. I had practiced in my quarters until my throat hurt, determined to do this one thing correctly, even if nothing else about this situation made sense. But standing here, looking at the way her whole body tensed at the sound of my voice, I hesitated. "May I ask a question first?" I said, directing the words to her, not her guards, not my commanding officer, not anyone else who thought they had authority over this moment. She blinked, confusion replacing terror for just a heartbeat. "You may. Any of this?" The question hung in the recycled air like a live grenade. Her guards stiffened, hands moving to weapons that probably violated 15 different treaty provisions. My own honor guard tensed, ready to respond to any threat. But she just stared at me with those impossible eyes, her skin shifting through a rainbow of colors I couldn't begin to interpret. "Want?" she repeated, testing the word like it was foreign. "I want my people to survive. I want the war to end. I want—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "It doesn't matter what I want. It matters to me," I said. The transport shuttle's engines began their pre-launch cycle, a subtle reminder that time was running out. The guards would leave. She would stay. and whatever happened next would define not just our lives, but the fragile peace that hung between our worlds. I stepped closer, close enough to see the individual scales that formed patterns across her skin, close enough to smell something like ozone and honey. The chains hummed louder, responding to my proximity with increased light and warmth. My hand moved to the central lock, fingers hovering over the release mechanism that would begin the ceremony. She took a sharp breath, her whole body going rigid. "Please," she whispered, so softly that I almost missed it. "Please don't." I froze, my hand still extended, mind racing through protocols and treaties and the very real possibility that I was about to cause an intergalactic incident. "Don't what?" "Don't release them." Her voice was stronger now, urgent. "Not yet. Not like this. You don't understand what you're doing." The commanding officer's voice cut through the confusion. "Captain Reeves, you will complete the ceremony immediately." This delay is unacceptable, but I couldn't look away from her eyes, from the desperation I saw there. "Explain," I said to her, ignoring everything else. "You have 30 seconds. She glanced at her guards, then back to me. Her skin had shifted to red, a color that made alarm bells ring in the back of my mind. These chains are the only thing keeping me stable. My kind, when we are claimed, when we bond. The neurochemical cascade is violent. Without restraints, without control, I could—" She stopped, struggling with the words. "I could hurt you. I could hurt everyone on this station. The chains suppress the bond rage until it can be properly channeled. It's why we have the ceremony, why there are specific words and specific timing. It's not about humiliation or control. It's about survival." I looked at the guards, saw the minute nod one of them gave. "Confirmation." The commanding officer was shouting now, something about insubordination and court-martials. The honor guard was muttering, uncertain. And I was standing in the middle of it all, my hand still hovering over a lock that could either save or doom everyone in this hangar. "Tell me what to do," I said to her. "The right way. The way that keeps everyone safe." For the first time since she'd walked down that ramp, Queen Sariath smiled. It was a small thing, tentative, but it transformed her face completely. "You speak the words," she said. "All of them. Every syllable. And you don't release the chains until the very last word, until the bond has already begun forming, until my body has accepted what my mind already knows." "Which is?" "That I am your partner. That these chains are temporary, but what we build might not be." I took a breath, feeling the weight of choice settle over me like a second skin. Then I began to speak the ancient words, watching as her skin shifted from red to something gentler, something that looked almost like hope. The ceremony took 12 minutes. When I finally released the locks, she didn't rage or attack or collapse. She simply stood there, unchained, and offered me her hand. I took it, feeling warmth and the faint electric tingle of biology meeting biology across the void of evolution. "Thank you," she said, as her guards departed and my world shifted into something strange and new. "For asking. For listening. For caring what I wanted." "You're welcome," I replied, meaning it more than I'd meant anything in years. Behind us, the shuttle lifted off, taking with it the last physical connection to her old life. Ahead lay uncertainty, political complications, and 1,000 challenges we'd have to face together. But in that moment, standing in the hangar with her hand in mine and the chains coiled forgotten at our feet, I thought maybe peace was possible after all. Then the alarms started screaming and everything went to hell. The station lurched sideways, gravity compensators struggling to keep up with whatever force had just hit us. Sariath stumbled, and I caught her instinctively, one arm wrapping around her waist as the deck plates buckled beneath us. The honor guard scattered, training overriding confusion as they sought defensive positions. "Report!" The commanding officer barked into his calm, his earlier anger forgotten in the face of immediate crisis. Red emergency lights flooded the hangar, painting everything in shades of blood and shadow. Through the viewing ports, I could see debris spreading in a glittering cloud, pieces of something that had been whole just moments before. Not the Valtheron shuttle, it was already too far away. Something else. Something close. "Hull breach on Deck 9, a disembodied voice announced over the station-wide comm. "All personnel to emergency stations. This is not a drill." Sariath's grip on my arm tightened, her nails sharper than human ones, designed for climbing and fighting and survival. "That was an explosion," she said, voice tight with certainty, deliberate. "Shaped charges, probably fusion-triggered to maximize damage." I stared at her, processing the implications. "How do you know that?" "Because I know what weapons sound like when they tear through hull plating." Her skin had gone pale, almost white, colors bleeding away to leave something that looked like fear and recognition mixed together. Someone just tried to kill the piece. The commanding officer was shouting orders, organizing evacuation procedures and damage control, but my mind was racing ahead, connecting dots I didn't want to connect. The timing was too perfect. The ceremony had just concluded, the Valtheron shuttle had just departed, and now an explosion designed to look like sabotage right when tensions were highest. "It's a false flag," I said, the words tasting like poison. "Someone wants to restart the war." Sarith nodded, her whole body tense with calculation.
"The question is who? My people who oppose the peace?
Yours who think surrender is weakness? Or someone else entirely who benefits from both our civilizations bleeding each other dry? Through the viewport, I saw a section of the outer ring separated from the main structure, atmosphere venting in a crystalline spray that caught the starlight. People were dying. Right now, while we stood here theorizing. "Captain Reeves," the commanding officer snapped. "Get the Queen to safety. Secure holding in Section 4. Move." I started to obey, old instincts kicking in, but Sarith pulled against my grip. "No," she said firmly. "Absolutely not." "This isn't negotiable," I said, trying to gentle it but knowing how it sounded. "There's a protocol for protecting high-value targets during station emergencies." Her eyes flashed, pupils contracting to pinpoints. "I am not a target to be protected. I am a military commander who has more experience with ship-to-ship combat than anyone currently on this station. And if you lock me in a holding cell while people die, you prove every criticism of this treaty right." She wasn't wrong, and we both knew it. But letting her run toward danger instead of away from it went against every protective instinct I had, instincts that were apparently getting stronger as the bond she'd mentioned began to form in my brain chemistry. A third explosion, this one sending shockwaves through the deck that knocked several guards off their feet. The structural integrity alerts were screaming now, automated systems reporting damage faster than anyone could process. We had minutes, maybe less, before critical systems failed. "What do you need?" I asked, making the decision and hoping I wouldn't regret it. Her expression shifted, surprise and respect mixing together. "Access to your command network, sensor data from the last 10 minutes, and someone who knows this station's defensive systems well enough to override safety protocols without triggering a cascade failure." I pulled my command tablet from its magnetic lock at my hip, entering override codes that would probably end my career if we survived this. "You've got network access." Sensor data's uploading now. "And I know the defensive systems because I helped install half of them during the station's last refit." She took the tablet, her fingers moving across the display with practiced efficiency. Lines of data scrolled past, too fast for me to follow, but her eyes tracked every detail. "There," she said, highlighting 3 points on a schematic of the station. "Those aren't random targets. They're cascading, designed to overload your power distribution and force an emergency core jettison negotiate. Which would leave the station dead in space," I finished. "Easy target for anyone who wanted to finish the job. Or blame whoever they wanted," she added. "My people's ships use distinctive weapon signatures. So do yours. But these explosions are using civilian mining charges, available to anyone with enough credits and no conscience. We've got reports of armed intruders on Deck 7. They're moving toward engineering." Sarith looked up from the tablet, her skin cycling through colors too fast to track. "They're going to manually trigger the core jettison, standard sabotage protocol for a station this size. You'll have maybe 4 minutes from when they breach engineering to when every power system goes dark. Then we stop them before they breach," I said, checking my sidearm's charge and knowing it wouldn't be enough. "How many guards can we spare?" "None," the commanding officer said flatly. "Every available person is on damage control or evacuation. We're spread too thin as it is." I looked at Sarith, saw the same calculation in her eyes. "Just us, then." "I need them back." I must have looked as confused as I felt because she actually smiled sharp and dangerous. "Not all of them. Just the wrist restraints. They double as energy conduits. My kind can channel bioelectric fields when we're properly grounded. Without something to focus the discharge, I'm just another scared alien. With them, I'm a weapon." The commanding officer started to protest, something about treaties and protocols and authorized equipment. I ignored him, picking up the discarded chains from where they'd fallen. They were warm to the touch, still humming with residual energy. I fastened them around her wrists, feeling the locks click into place with a finality that seemed to satisfy something deep in her biology. She took a breath, and the chains lit up like stars. Current arced between the links, dancing across her skin in patterns that were beautiful and terrifying. Her eyes glowed with the same light, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made my bones vibrate. Now we run. We ran. Through corridors filled with smoke and screaming evacuation alarms, past injured personnel being carried to medical bays, around debris fields where hull plating had buckled inward. The station was dying around us, and every second counted. Deck 7 was a war zone. Bodies in civilian clothes, not intruders but workers who'd been in the wrong place when someone decided peace was too expensive. I stopped at the first one, checking for a pulse I knew wouldn't be there, and felt Syria's hand on my shoulder. "You can mourn them later," she said, "not unkind. Right now, you saved them by stopping whoever did this." I hated that she was right, but I stood and kept moving. The entrance to engineering was ahead, doors sealed but showing scorch marks from attempted breaches. Whoever the intruders were, they hadn't made it through yet. "Can you sense them?" I asked, remembering briefing notes about Valtheron's spatial awareness. She nodded, her head tilting in a way that looked alien and predatory. 6 hostiles, all human biology. They're planting charges on the door. 45 seconds until breach. Not enough time to call for backup. Barely enough time to think. I looked at her. This woman who hours ago had been a symbol of defeat and was now possibly the only thing standing between survival and catastrophe. "Can you take them?" The chains around her wrists flared brighter. "Can you?" "I guess we'll find out together." The door exploded inward with a roar that made my ears ring. Through the smoke came figures in dark armor, weapons raised and already firing. I dove left, returning fire with shots that sizzled through the air where targets had been a heartbeat before. These weren't amateurs. They moved like soldiers, like people who'd done this before. Serioth didn't dive. She walked forward into the gunfire like she was strolling through a garden, the chains around her wrists spinning in complex patterns that created a field of crackling energy. Shots that should have torn through her flesh hit the field and deflected, ricocheting into walls and ceiling with sparks that added to the chaos. One of the intruders, braver or stupider than the others, rushed her with a blade that glowed with molecular cutting edges. She caught his wrist, the chains wrapping around it like living things, and channeled enough current through his nervous system to drop him convulsing to the deck. "Engineering is clear," she shouted over the sound of weapons fire. "But they've already started the core jettison sequence." 2 minutes 40 seconds until cascade failure. I pushed deeper into the room, using control consoles as cover, taking shots when I could and mostly trying not to die. The intruders were falling back, regrouping, and I realized with sick certainty that they didn't care if they stopped us. The sequence was running. They'd already won. "Can you stop it?" I called to Serioth. "I don't know your systems well enough," she called back, her voice strained with effort as she held off 3 attackers simultaneously. "I'd be guessing, and guessing wrong means the same result." We redirected. I sprinted for the main engineering console, sliding into the operator's chair and pulling up schematics I'd studied during that refit I'd mentioned. The core jettison was designed to save lives by getting the reactor away from the station before it could breach, but the sequence assumed the core was unstable, assumed it needed distance and empty space. What if we gave it distance but not empty space? What if we aimed it? My fingers flew across the controls, overriding safety systems and recalculating trajectories. The intruders realized what I was doing and concentrated their fire on my position. Rounds sparked off the console, one passing close enough to my head that I felt the heat. Serioth was there suddenly, standing between me and death, her energy field taking hits that would have killed me 3 times over. "Whatever you're doing," she grunted, "do it faster." 90 seconds, I said, entering the final coordinates. "The core's going to jettison straight toward the debris field from the first explosion. When it goes, the reactor bloom will illuminate every piece of shrapnel like a spotlight." Her head whipped around, understanding lighting up her face. "And your sensors can backtrack the trajectory, find the origin point of the explosives." "But only if we're still alive to read the data." The intruders had stopped shooting, probably realizing bullets wouldn't stop what was already in motion. They were retreating, trying to escape before the core separated. Smart. I should probably do the same. "Go," Serioth said, still holding position between me and them. "Get to a safe distance. Not without you." She turned, and for just a heartbeat, our eyes met. The bond that had been forming since the ceremony pulsed between us, strong enough that I could feel what she was feeling. Determination. Fear, and underneath it all, something that might have been gratitude that she didn't have to die alone. "Together then," she said. 30 seconds. I grabbed her hand, the one not wrapped in chains, and we ran. Back through the smoke, past the fallen intruders, into corridors that shook with the violence of systems tearing themselves apart. The evacuation alarms had reached a new pitch, the automated voice counting down in calm tones that made the terror worse. 10 seconds. We made it to an emergency bulkhead, slamming our hands on the manual release. The door ground shut with agonizing slowness, sealing just as the core jettison sequence reached its conclusion. Through the reinforced viewport, we watched the reactor core separate from the station, maneuvering thrusters firing in the pattern I'd programmed. It sailed into the debris field like a comet, and when the reactor bloom ignited, it turned night into day. Every piece of shrapnel, every fragment of evidence, all of it lit up in crystalline detail. The station's sensors were recording everything, tracking trajectories, calculating origin points, building a picture of exactly who had tried to murder Peace. Saraif leaned against the bulkhead, breathing hard, the chains around her wrists dimming back to their normal glow. Did it work? I pulled up the sensor data on my tablet, watching as the computer assembled the puzzle pieces. The answer made my blood run cold. Yeah, I said quietly. It worked. Who? Not your people, I said. Not mine either. Third party. Ships registered to Vega Consortium. They've been selling weapons to both sides for the whole war. And peace means their profits dry up. So they tried to make sure it never happened. I looked at the data, at the evidence that would hold up in any court and any system. They failed. Alarms were already transitioning from evacuation to damage control. The station had survived, barely. People were already moving through the corridors, assessing damage, treating wounded, beginning the long process of recovery. And somewhere in all that chaos, someone was arresting the intruders we'd left unconscious, confiscating their equipment, adding physical evidence to what the sensors had recorded. The commanding officer found us an hour later, looking exhausted and angry and relieved all at once. You disobeyed direct orders, he said to me. You endangered a high-value diplomatic asset. He looked at Saraif. You violated about 15 different treaty provisions about military capabilities and authorized equipment. We waited, knowing there was more. You also saved approximately 4,000 lives and handed us enough evidence to prosecute the people who've been profiting from our mutual destruction. He sighed. I'm required to file a formal reprimand. I'm also required to recommend you both for commendations. Paperwork is going to be a nightmare. He left us standing in the corridor, and for the first time since the ceremony, we were truly alone. Saraif looked down at the chains still locked around her wrists, then up at me. You could remove them now, she said quietly. The danger has passed. The bond is stable. I reached for the locks, hesitated. Do you want me to? She smiled, the expression carrying echoes of that first tentative hope. Ask me tomorrow, after we've survived whatever political nightmare is about to descend. After we've figured out what peace actually means when you build it with someone instead of having it forced on you. We walked through the damaged station together, her hand in mine, the chains catching light and throwing rainbows across scarred walls. Behind us lay war and sacrifice and all the things that had brought us to this moment. Ahead lay uncertainty and challenge and the fragile possibility of something better. But in that moment, in the wreckage of what could have been and the foundation of what might be, we had something more important than certainty. We had choice. We had partnership. We had each other. And sometimes, against all odds and expectations, that was enough to start building peace. The chains would come off eventually, when we were both ready. Until then, they were a reminder not of surrender but of trust, not of imprisonment but of the moment someone asked what she wanted and actually listened to the answer. That mattered. That would always matter. And from that one act of respect, we would build everything else.